Greetings, good afternoon, good morning, or even good evening, depending where you are in the world. So, welcome to another one of our events, Community Question Time. We're broadcasting from the UK, but welcome to our global watchers and listeners. Today, we're going to be dealing with, is the UK headed towards a race war? As you know, over the last several days, there's been race riots throughout the UK. So we have an esteemed panel to deal with what's been going on over the last several days and a way forward for the UK. So our first panelist is Sister Katie Downey. She's an community activist. She was one of the first Black Lives Matter members based in London. She's also been one of our brilliant campaigners regarding the Windrush campaign compensation, making sure that our elderly get justice. She's also qualified in behavioural science, and she does brilliant social work as well. Our next panelist is Brother Lee Jasper, who's one of our leading community politicians. He has a wealth of knowledge and wealth of experience, and he's put in so much work over the decades regarding political empowerment for our people. Our next panelist is Brother Rashid Rose of the Salam Project. He's been within our Orthodox Muslim community, raising awareness, allowing Muslims to be empowered and seeking social justice. He's also been the chair of the African Caribbean Muslim Alliance. Our next panelist is Brother Paul Obinna, who's a brilliant cultural consultant, educator, and historian. And if you do not, or if you have not heard, or if you don't have his historical timeline, please seek out that brother, because everybody needs that for their knowledge and for their wisdom and for their understanding. We also have Brother Twilight Bay, who's originally from the United States of America, Los Angeles. He's a social intervention leader. He's worked all over the world, empowering and upraising our youth, dealing with so-called gang intervention. He's also been a political and social activist, and his work has taken him all over the world. We also have David Dalgleish, who is a former Home Office researcher. Yeah, that's right. That's how we do it here. Former Home Office researcher. He's also a social interventionist and educator. He's a brilliant ally within the field of activism as well. And we have Brother Rashid Nix, who was a leading member of the Green Party. He's a brilliant community activist, political community activist, and filmmaker, and also radio host and DJ. Last but not least, the brother who I'm blessed to share my name with, Minister Abdul Hakim Mohammed, who is the European Regional representative of the Honourable Ministers Farrakhan and Nation of Islam. He's going to be your main host for today. So I hand over to our brother now, who will take you forward for today's proceedings. Assalamu alaikum, brother. How you doing?
Alaikum salam, all is well, and warm welcome to each and every one of you in the listening audience, and warm welcome to my panelists. As you have all been informed, or you've seen on the television or heard on the radio or read in the newspapers about a wave of rioting taking place in the United Kingdom. And the basis of these riots are something that has really caught the world's attention. I've been receiving calls from people all over the world asking me what's happening, what's going on in the UK, as if this type of behavior and this type of misrepresentation of quote unquote British culture is something new. So I want to, I'm not going to reintroduce our illustrious panel, but we're going to spend a very short period of time trying to glean some understanding of what was and are the causes of such upheaval taking place in the United Kingdom and what we can learn from it and avoid any serious consequences going into the future. So I'm going to go to my elder statesman here, Brother Lee Jasper, to open up. I'll start with my first questions in regards to causality, Brother Lee. Those who are listening from different parts of the world, give us a flavor of what you believe is the cause of such rioting that has been taking place here in the UK.
White supremacy is the fundamental driver. I don't know if people have known the demographics, but if you look at the demographics of the world, you see that Europeans and Western European nations' birth rates are dropping through the floor, while Africa and Asia have some of the most youthful populations in China in the world. So I think that the elite have done their slide rule calculations. They can see what the future holds unless something very dramatic happens. And they become increasingly hysterical as a result. In addition, we're facing a global economic crisis as the shift in the world's balance of power moves away from Western nations in Europe to Africa, China, Asia, Latin America. The development of the BRICS nations, the de-dollarization, all of this has caused immense panic in the wealthy billionaire elite class that funds white supremacy. And all over the world, they are pumping millions of dollars into anything that can cause a crisis. What they want is to start a race war for sure. We've seen that by the constant victimization of the Muslim community now for, I don't know how long, as long as we can remember. And that demonization, the absolute collapse in public confidence in our politicians, which means British democracy is and politicians are the least trusted people. Even estate agents, I think, are more trusted than politicians at this moment. Our political system is a 17th century, antiquated system of democracy, not fit for the 21st century. And the fundamentals of Brexit radically transformed the perspective of race and race equality in this country. We saw coming out of that the Sewell report, the war on the woke, years of austerity, cuts, deep cuts to services in Black communities. And I think another interesting aspect is I'm from Manchester, and the recession hit Manchester in the 1980s. So although we're feeling it here in the South now, in those areas in the North, they felt the effects of Thatcherism very early on. And most of those towns that were working towns are now deserts of drug addiction, of family dysfunction, racism. And that's largely because people have no work and long-term generational unemployment in those areas. And those people in those communities have been seduced by the sirens of the extreme right, the Tommy Robinsons, the Nigel Farages of this world, that it's not their fault that Brexit hasn't worked. It's all the fault of these Black people and migrants. What I read into all of this is a real return to the sort of Oswald Mosley fascist campaigns of the 1930s. Many of you won't remember, but the initials KBW were often sprayed on walls. That was for Keep Britain White. And that was the graffiti that was daubed everywhere. And I think when you really explore, and I'll end on this point, Minister, because I know time is tight, when you examine what these people are saying, what they're really saying is, we want to ban Islam, close all mosques, deport all foreign criminals, stop all brown and Black migration to this country. And once we've done all that, we'll then focus on the resident population and see what we can do with them. And I think because Brexit has doomed this country into a form of economic suicide, it means that the history of European nations is that whenever their economies decline, racism and fascism always rises. Any student of history can tell you that. And we're going to face some of the most toughest economics times we've seen throughout the last 20 years, tougher than the 2008 economic crash and the period of austerity during the 14 so years of the Tories.
Excellent. And I'm looking forward to circling back to you, Lee, in regards to discussing how we can mitigate, the effects of that which is inevitable, as you just mentioned, particularly an economic collapse. So, Sister Katie, I want to come straight to you, because one of the points that Brother Lee mentioned is immigration, and you're, an immigration specialist. So talk to us about these accusations of, the immigrants are coming into the UK and taking our jobs, bearing in mind the person speaking has a can of beer in one hand and a pot belly. So and has probably the mental average of a 12-year-old. But how does immigration play into this whole justification to riot on the streets of London?
Thank you, Brother Minister. In regards to immigration, the UK government, they actually benefit from immigration. They benefit from allowing people into this country and having them here, sometimes with no recourse to public funds, meaning they're not able to work or claim benefits, as most people actually believe the opposite. Most people involved in the rioting believe that these people come here and get free everything, but they don't even have access to the NHS healthcare. Right. Or
just to stop you, anything. Just to stop you, why don't they know that?
Well, this is coming on to one of my other points. The thing is there's a lot of miseducation in the UK, and it's fed through institutions, it's fed through the media, it's fed in the educational system in this country, because the national curriculum, for example, it's built on a lot of untrue versions of history, that the government and the scholars and stuff from the UK know that is not right. They know it's not correct, but they still teach it to make it look like they are the true victors, of all of these historic things, and they were rightful in all of the things they've done. So, the government and the elite of this nation, of the UK, they still deny their hand in slavery. We're still waiting for King Charles to produce the findings from research on the royal family's hand in the transatlantic slave trade. He said that he would be releasing that in 2026. So, until that research is produced, and, if it does admit any type of liability, I'll be surprised. But until that is produced, there hasn't been any true admission of the wrongdoings from the UK. They've kind of always denied their hand in it and act like the reason why slavery was abolished was due to the white Christian kind of missionaries who protested against slavery and got it ended, basically. But actually, it started from the UK, started from the House, what they call the House of Commons now. It started from the Parliament within the UK, slavery. It wouldn't have happened without, right, those in the UK. So immigration, it plays its hand directly into the riots, because the general public of the UK, they've been misinformed by the media and by the government continuously, that a lot of the social issues in this country are the blame of the migrants, when actually the migrants that come to this country, whether they come through the right channels or illegally, they benefit this system, and the government and the elite, they benefit financially. So one of the influences to all of this is the fact that, if people question why would the government do this, it benefits them financially, and this is a society that's built on capitalism. So those that are in control of the society here will literally do anything that makes money. For immigration, people from the Windrush generations, they come to the UK, and they come here based on an invitation from the royal family's office. People were invited from the British Commonwealth nations, which are actually colonies, meaning owned by slave masters from the UK, which evidences the UK's hand in slavery. But anyway, they come here, they were asked to come here to come and rebuild the nation after World War II ended in 1945. So in 1948, people from the Commonwealth nations, which most people think are the Caribbean islands, but actually it's many Asian countries, a number of African countries, a number of Caribbean nations, and a number of other nations such as like Australia, Canada, etc. There's Bangladesh on there. There's Chinese. China's on there.
Tell me
There's a lot
this:
of nations
the
on there.
governing bodies of the parliament at that time, they actually went on a tour of their colonies.
Yes.
And invited, those who they colonized to come over to the United Kingdom after the Second World War in the name of, opportunities, jobs, and earn a lot of money that you could send back home. But the truth of the matter was, it was really to rebuild this country after Hitler had his way. Is that correct?
Yes, so that's correct.
Are you familiar with what government was responsible for that invitation? Was it Labour or the Conservatives? Do you recall?
It was the Conservatives. My understanding is it was the Conservatives. However, Labour also contributed to it as well. But at the time of the Windrush era, when people arrived here, Labour, who then were in power,
Right.
I think it changed during the time. Labour, who were then in power, they were being kind of targeted by the people, the white British people who were protesting against anti-migration, anti-immigration as they are now. But at those times, it was about the Windrush eras. People who were protesting at that time, they would produce flyers saying, if you want to vote, if you want the N word for a neighbour, vote Labour. So if you want to N for a neighbour, vote Labour. So I think it was a combination of both parties at the time.
Okay.
Because the Windrush era actually lasted between 1948 and 1973. But just to finish, the Windrush generations, they were invited on false pretenses that when they arrived here, they would have better accommodation, a better quality of life. They'd be able to send for their family members. They were convinced to leave their children at home at very young ages.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of those things didn't happen.
Right. So we were invited under some false pretense that we would be able to, invite the rest of our families, only for our families to remain back in our home territories. So I'm gonna shoot over to Brother Rashid Rose, because Brother Rashid, we've been hearing a lot about the Muslim community and those concerned wanting to hold Muslims responsible as a spark in the first instance, that a Muslim was responsible for the death of these 3 young innocent girls who lost their lives in a very unfortunate circumstance. And when it was revealed that no Muslim was behind such, that it was actually a young Christian boy, then they seemed to pivot from that. But the prayer seemed to be that, those concerned wanted it to be, or they wanted to target their frustration against Muslims. Why do you think that is?
Bismillah. I was watching an interview yesterday with Tony Robinson. He's from Luton, and he mentioned that the Muslims in Luton has always been problematic. And he had always had issues with the Muslims because they didn't integrate, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. And the tension developed where he had to do certain things to retaliate against the Muslims in Luton because they were doing drugs, they were doing prostitution. So he developed some sort of mechanism to counteract that. Subsequently, this standoff has developed from since then until now. And that battle has been going on, and like I said, it's going on today. And if we look at the situation currently with the riots, the Muslims have always had to defend themselves against white racists because let's put class into this as well. There's an underclass in this society of white people who are very poor, deprived, really don't want to do any set of work, sit down on the dole and smoke. That's what they want to do. And when people come here, Asians and others come here, work hard, put themselves in universities, excel in economics and education otherwise, this white underclass have a problem with that, a serious problem. And what do? They take the frustration out of the Muslims who they believe are taking the jobs. I submitted a video yesterday, hoping to use it today, with a young man being interviewed by a journalist. And he was asked why he don't have a job. He said he had a criminal conviction. So the journalist asked him, isn't that the reason why you can't have a job? He said, no, it's because of immigrants. So the ignorance is another factor. And Muslims have always been on the back foot from then, having to defend themselves, and the whole situation in Palestine contributing to the fact that Muslims are seen as pariahs. And racism has forced a situation where the white racists are actively thinking and hoping to eliminate Muslims to solve the problem. But that's just one aspect of it, because this whole class structure is something else. And this underclass, like I said earlier, has always had issues with Black people. We've been in this country, building Europe for centuries. And for them to come and tell us that we don't belong here is absurd. Our forefathers built Europe. We are likely coming back here to take us right what we deserve. So Muslims are just part of the problem. So that conflict would go on, but it have to be resolved at some point. So
and we're going to circle back.
That's basically it.
Yeah, we're going to circle back in regards to what you mentioned in regards to taking what is ours. That is a very big statement, and we're going to circle back. Brother Rashid, you coffeed up? You ready?
Yep.
I want you to give us some insight in regards to the historical stoking, if you will, of this racial fire that seems to be, at a fever pitch at the moment. Because if we look back even at our former Prime Minister, Richie Sunak, the language, the emotive language that he would use, like, we have to stop the boats. Then you have Suella Braverman, you have Priti Patel, you have Boris Johnson, you have Nigel Farage, all really fanning the flames and using their period of time on national television to really focus on, innocent people who are trying to escape poverty wherever they may be living, for the opportunity not to sell drugs or to engage in illegal activity, but actually try and work and make something of their lives. And what sort of responsibility do these so-called leaders have in regards to that which is taking place on the streets of London? How culpable are they? And do you believe they know what they're doing?
Oh, well, I would say unequivocally, they know exactly what's going on. And I mean, from what I learned from my time working in the political arena, and I'm sure Mr. Jasper can verify that, these guys operate on a different level, a different agenda, and what we see in the public space, what they say in terms of statements and whatever, doesn't quite match up with the rhetoric that takes place behind the scenes. So, so in the in Sun Tzu's book, The Art of War, he says that all warfare is based upon deception. And so politically, I think that we've kind of been suckered into believing that there might be, some kind of silver lining, and I don't quite see it that way. Looking at how this rhetoric is being whipped up, like Mr. Jasper said, you can go back to the times of Oswald Mosley and the brown shirts. I mean, that's going way back. And this carried on right through into the 1960s, and then you go into the 1970s. And I remember being a child growing up in South London, and there were certain walls where it said "blacks out" and NF was written up was painted on the wall, and we saw these things on our way to school. We went to Peckham Manor, brother. We know what's.
I don't know nothing about that.
I went to Peckham Manor, and I remember there were certain little boys in that school that you knew that their family was on certain agendas, and
Yeah.
so this is my point. Is this is something that has been a constant. It's been a constant, and we can go back and we can take it back as far as what but there's always been some kind of for want of a better word, racial friction. I mean, I'm reading this. Can I hold this up? Look up. Can you see this? Oh, you can't even see it.
Blurry. That's
Oh,
better.
yeah.
Was better.
Sorry, man. What's going on with this? Yeah. Sorry. This book here is called Inquisition and Society in Spain. It's a fascinating book to read because it looks at the fact that the Moors, the Muslims were in Spain for 700 years, and they were deeply entrenched in Spanish society, and they contributed to society, and they built architecture and irrigation systems and brought culture and art and science and learning. 800 years down the line, there was a set of people in Spain who said, we want these people out of the country. We want, and they were there for 700 years. So here's us who have been in this country, a couple of generations. I think maybe it's the wake up and smell the coffee moment, because this has been an ongoing situation.
Right.
I can't really say that there has been a time when it's been, when you actually feel, yes, I'm here and I'm part of this. And
Right.
unfortunately, there's a set of the demographic of this country, which we saw, in full effect, over the past couple of weeks, but they also helped deliver the Brexit vote, which are pretty much gullible idiots.
Right.
And they they don't seem to understand what the real issue is, what they're dealing with. So therefore, the easiest person to point the finger at is someone that is quote unquote different to you, and not realizing that this country is being hollowed out, not by Muslims, not by people in boats, not by brown people, not by immigration, asylum seekers. It's being hollowed out by the elites of this country who aren't really patriotic at all. Their allegiance is to making money. And I don't think these gullible idiots who are out on the street, waving their flag, their St. George's flag, understand what it is that's going on. The flag of St. George. St. George was born in Palestine or Turkey, depending on what source you want to use. If St. George was alive today, they would be running him out of the country. They claim to be white Christians. If Jesus was alive today, Jesus was born, and his parents, they were refugees. Remember, they had to leave where they was born. They were refugees. And these are the same people that say we don't want refugees in this country. Like, man are confused, gullible idiots. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
Right.
So this
It shouldn't be too difficult then to overcome gullible idiots, should it? It shouldn't be too difficult.
It boils down to education. You know that.
But what I'm saying to you is that if your opposition is a gullible idiot, it shouldn't be too hard for wide awake, intelligent people to bypass their idiocy, right?
Yeah.
And are we not in a position where we shouldn't allow those who are not educated about history, even their own history, to draw us out? Because it seems as if there is a massive draw taking place where, if we're not confident in who we are, we can end up getting caught up in the nonsense that
absolutely
is manifesting itself.
Today in Brixton, there was a rally today in Brixton, stand up against racism. And a few people turned up. There was, several hundred people were out there. But it was interesting because I'd say 95% of the people there were white people who came out, who felt so strongly about what was taking place that they came to the center of Brixton and stood up there and were protesting against racism and the treatment of immigrants.
Right.
And the black folk in Brixton, I mean, we're busy trying to survive, I guess. But it was interesting because it made me realize that some of what we're witnessing, it's not. And this is just me pushing the boat out here. Something I heard a musician friend say. He said, it's not a case of white against black or black against white. He said it's now black and white against white. So there are those people in this country, those educated people who understand, hold on a sec, You know, we're all being duped here. We're all being ripped off here. We're all being hustled. You know, Thames Water is 15 billion pounds in debt, but yet still they're paying millions of pounds to shareholders, and they're trying to put up our water bill whilst pumping sewage into the rivers. We're being hustled here. It's not the immigrants. It's
Right.
it's something bigger than this. And some of them are starting to realize it and are realizing that, you know, maybe we have common ground here.
Right. Well, somebody seems to be stoking the black
Absolutely.
and white thing as opposed to right and wrong and truth and falsehood and rich and poor, because it doesn't seem as if that's the basis on which the real conversation should take place is actually taking place. But the conversation seems to be on the most pettiest of all levels.
Yeah.
So, Brother Twilight, I'm going to jump in or come over to your house now, and I want to discuss immigration. I want to go a little bit deeper into immigration because I want our audience just to have an appreciation for this definition: immigration, movement of people into another country or region to which they are not native. So so with that as a backdrop, Brother Twilight, you know, talk to me about the originators, if you will, of migration, because wasn't we kidnapped in the 16th century to really justify or establish this term immigration?
Well, you know, it's funny because in the U.S. they refer to the Mangamese or the transporting of Africans against their will as migrant workers. That they were all migrant workers. This is the new narrative that they're trying to push. Let me first say that the Mangamese, in terms of human history, has not had an equal in terms of human atrocity and abuse ever in our history books before this particular thing, this particular phenomenon. Slavery of various different forms, called servitude, indentured servitude, tillage, and different names have been attributed to the word slavery, but they don't all mean the same. And what our people happen to go through, this chattel slavery,
Better. We've lost you, Twilight.
But it also,
better.
Yeah, is that better?
That's now better. Yeah. Much.
Okay, all right. I was told that my audio wasn't coming through that great.
Yeah.
So we have so having been through what we've been through and stripped of all humanity and dehumanizing the way that we were and moved around the planet as as basically cargo, not even human, but as cargo, you know, forced immigration is something that we need to talk about as well. If we look at the shape of the world as we know it today, you have millions of displaced people living in different parts of the world, but by right are living in those parts of the world not because they choose to, but because of a legacy, because of a history that has led to them being there. And by them being there and entrapped there, they're somewhat imprisoned, even though they're called citizens. They're imprisoned, even though they're called, in some of these places, they're referring to themselves as natives, although they've settled in those places. And the reality is when you're a prisoner and you're stuck somewhere, someone is responsible for moving people around and shaping the world in the way that it's been shaped today. And when you look at that population and who that population is, as many have said on this panel already, it points to a certain group of people. You know, and if I take from Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, she was able to work out that 93% of people who decide what television shows go on television, 90% of people who decide what books are published, 85% of people who decides what news is covered, and 95% of people who decide what music is produced, and 82% of school teachers and full-time college professors are 84%, and 97% of the National Football League in the United States, even though they own 97% of the football teams, And 98% of the basketball teams, even though 75% of them, those teams are made up of black players, are all white folks. They control the institutions. They decide where they go militarily to invade. They decide what happens with the social economic structure of the world. And even though that, we got some people that are on the fringes and at the bottom tier of this system, and even those who say that they are our allies, they have not taken actions to dismantle those institutions that maintain this system of abuse and this system of forced migration of moving people around the planet. Because nobody comes to Britain because of its pleasant weather or the disposition of its so-called natives. Nobody comes here for that. People come here to extract and to build because they came and made their presence felt where we originally come from. So people have been made to feel they come to where they feel they need to come in order to have a life. Right. It's not by coincidence that English is the lingua franca of the world. Right. You can't be a pilot without it speaking English. Speaking English. I was just in the Netherlands a week ago, and everywhere I go, people are speaking English, right, even though they're supposed to speak Dutch, right, and when I go to Canada, again. So when you talk about forced migration and the slave trade, they've implemented this whole system of immigration, right, by force or by creating economic conditions that make people feel that they have to go where their wealth was taken.
Right. And the means of transportation was boats, right? Ironically. So
yes.
So thank you for that, Brother Twilight. So Brother Paula Binner, warm welcome to the community question time, dear brother. So in encapsulating all what has already been discussed, right? I wanted you to just plumb the depths also of the immigration argument and the immigration conversation and the fact that Muslims and so-called immigrants are being scapegoated, and the audacity of anybody to say to a person of color to go back to your country. If we was to explore that narrative, if we went back to the Caribbean and back to Africa and sent all Caucasian people who we met in those countries back home, would the world be a better place?
I've got to say to you that the games are afoot. They really are afoot. It's a mass distraction. Mm-hmm. Islam is the old enemy of the British, going back to the time of the Crusades. And so if you go and look at what the responses have always been to the, sorry, there's a feedback. Can you still hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can everybody who's not speaking please mute?
Yeah, David, is yours on?
Mm-hmm.
Take the speaker off. Yeah. Sorry. So if you go back into the Middle Ages and then go into the 1350 on, you're going to find that the Turks and the Moors were slaving right across as high as Iceland, down through Ireland, France, Spain, Portugal, etc. That was until roughly 1760. Two men called Thomas Arne and John Thompson wrote a song called Rule Britannia. Britannia rules the waves, British never, never shall be slaves. It was in response to the fact that they'd been getting enslaved into the North African slave trade for over 300 years. Now, if I want to take the word slave has got nothing to do with Black people, nothing to do with Africans. It's Yugoslavians, Czechoslovakians, Eastern Europeans who were the Sac and Liber down in Spain. Now, what's in actual fact happening? If you take about the role of Adolf Hitler, and what he did was to go back in history by getting into the minds, what we're calling now epigenetics. Hitler was using that back in the day and allowed him to do his bedevilment and mischief by triggering the German people from the experiences they had genetically, and it's been pulled through. So please take that reasoning of epigenetics. And so what's actually happening now in this country, where the average reading age is like 9 years old, and you must remember that, 9 years old, because if you hear some of these guys interviewed on the radio, they're hardly going to set the educational firmament alight.
Right.
They don't know where things are, when things are. They're being told and led by people who are quite mischievous. I had a blessing, I didn't think of it at the time, that there was I was born 59, so I went through the 1960s with an honesty that white folk who didn't like you would tell you about your ass straight. There's no anti-racism. In fact, it was called racialism back then. And one day, the guy was a guy called John Kingsley Reid. If you go into the World in Action and look about Blackburn racism, 1976, 77, you see this guy called John Kingsley Reid, very charismatic. And I actually trained him in a health club when I was 21. So me being of mixed parentage, he came out of because I become the epitome of wrongness with miscegenation, both from blacks and whites, depending on who's actually talking. And so he was coming out saying he didn't want the country full of khaki-colored bastards and half-castes are the lowest form of life on the planet because they interfere with genetics. So it's on the guys he was influencing around me. That's how I cut my teeth of having a bad tongue. So one of my favorite ones is saying, how come you guys, the white guys, you couldn't find a white guy to knock out Muhammad Ali? Because his mother, Mama Bird, was mixed race. And so therefore, with that whole reasoning, I'd be saying to them, no, okay, tell me, show me your evidence. Show me that's all I started with. And so I trained John Reid, and he was a discus coach. I asked him in front of a gathering he used to hold courts in the health club. I asked him, what do you think of Daley Thompson? Oh, best all-round athlete the world's ever seen. He's this, he's that. And I'm thinking, khaki-colored bastard, lowest form of life. You understand me? I had to get that evidence. A lot of them, they know race is nonsense. Nonsense. But it's become part of the tripartite education system, which was based on class or caste, to sift and grade people over here. Remember, the education system over here is not even 200 years old for the masses. In fact, the Methodists, actually, they didn't call them primary schools, they called them primitive schools. So the education system that you've actually got over here is very young. Tripartite education was founded by Sir Cyril Burt, which if you want a long version of it, talk to David Dalglish, who showed the lineage of race theorists that actually went into educational assessment, including IQ by Hans Eysenck, who was another guy I met on my daughter's third birthday 30 years ago. These people set up that. What was it now? I just want to do your lyric and then I'll finish. It says, build your penitentiary, we'll build your schools, brainwash education to make us fools, by Robert Nesta Marley. Then there's another one, black man got a lot of problems, but they don't mind throwing a brick. White people go to school where they teach you how to be thick. And everybody's doing just what they're told to do. And no one wants to go to jail. The Clash, White Riot, 1976, piece of punk genre. So all I'll do is finish by saying this. To me, in my humble opinion, Arturo Schomburg, who did the Schomburg Library in Harlem, in New York City, he suggested a 3-phase approach by applying history to your day-to-day life. He said, first, learn the history of the people who are controlling you. That doesn't mean the history they teach you. It means to go and study the system. And that means to dig. That means critical thinking. That means to have the mentality that, boy, you remember the Emperor's New Clothes? Right. And everybody was agreeing with the Emperor. Oh, you look so fantastic. But then that little boy says, he's got no clothes on.
He's naked. That's right.
See him for what he is. See the system for what it is. So he said, learn the history of the people. That's white studies. Not black studies. White studies. Number 2, learn world history. That means to actually fit ourselves back into the picture past the last 400 years, where we're dwelling on the enslavement and dwelling on colonization, which is even younger. Learn the world history. So we reconnect to you've got dehumanization, we need to be rehumanized.
Right.
And rehumanization doesn't even exist as a word in the dictionary. You write it into a search engine, it'll give you the red underline saying rehumanization, which is dehumanization. Change the D to an R? No. It will say it's wrong. But dehumanization requires rehumanization. And finally, it says, learn the ongoing thread of your own history, way past enslavement by Europeans, way past enslavement by Turks, way past the enslavement by Arabs. Go back to your own genetic flow. I always say no, grow and flow.
Appreciate you. Thank you, brother.
Is that okay?
That is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just finally, brother. Please go on.
I'm the only one allowed to have free conclusions, my brother.
Sorry, what I was going to say to you, go onto the government website for the Companies House.
Right.
Look up the EDL's original name.
And what will we find?
I ain't saying online.
Okay.
You have to go and find it out.
Put it in the chat.
Just go do it. It only take you a minute.
Right. Thank you, brother. Thank you so much. I'm going to end this round of discussion with David Dalglish, who is indeed, a great scholar and analyst. So what is your analysis, David? You're on mute. Please unmute yourself.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
We can, clearly.
I'd just like to bring in a quote, and it's from even though I'm from Manchester, I've got to give reference to a Liverpudlian here, and he was a sculptor in the 1970s. He's called Arthur Dooley, and his quote was, "Nobody is as easy as to rob of their own culture as those that don't know they've got one." And I think the massive issue for a lot of white working class people in this country, their culture is what they're told their culture is by the likes of Farage, by our education system, by our royal family. So they don't take it, they aren't taking an interest, or they're not encouraged to take an interest in what their lives were like, what their ancestors' lives were like. They're looking at someone else, a projection of who they are. And therefore, because they don't know they have a culture, it's easy to manipulate them. It's easy to manipulate people to think that things are woke in modern days in terms of looking at us coming together across ethnicities. In Rochdale in 1847, Frederick Douglass got a crowd of 1,000 people in Rochdale. So are we saying that in 1847, Rochdale was woke? Or are we telling that white working class people in this country have been educated to think other people are their enemy? Because if they're looking across, they're not looking up. And I think that's one of the central issues here with the way that the opportunism has been used here. It's just a distraction technique to distract people away from the fact that they're getting their pants pulled down by the likes of Farage, by the likes of the City of London. And the best way for them to deal with that is to project the blame onto somebody else.
Right, very good. So, Brother Trevor Akeem, I'm going to come back to you, Brother Lee. So if you can be on standby for this point that I'm about to raise. In regards to us as Black people in the United Kingdom and the Western Hemisphere, this point has really been of major concern to me. Do you think we do ourselves a massive disservice in regards to not really properly quantifying the investment that our ancestors have made in the Western Hemisphere and not really seeing the West, seeing England and Europe as a part of our home, that we have a massive stake here through this very colorful term that everybody's using nowadays, known as sweat equity? If we look at our sweat equity, Brother Lee, Brother Trevor Hakeem, are we not the owners of Europe? Sweat equity wise?
I think we're drowning in sweat equity in Europe, literally, because the whole of Europe and the Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom can be seen to have been turbocharged by the massive profits, exceptional profits. The term that the streets of London streets were paved with gold comes out of the massive explosion of wealth that was pumped into industrial R&D And so when you see the hospitals and the roads and the schools and the Victorian monuments and the parks and the libraries and the monuments, you may well be led to believe that this was all down to the innovation and the creativity of the English people. When in actual fact, the siphoning off of human capital and resources from our countries of origin right around the world, and not just in Africa, but Latin America, Asia, all non-white peoples around the world, really. And it is a powerful case to be made to say that actually it's time for our 40 acres and a mule. You know, I think that part of the way forward for us is to have a much more focused energy analysis and understanding for reparations. So you make a valid point.
And you
know what?
Let me just say this before you jump in, brother Hakeem. Let me say this in regards to the whole terminology of focusing on reparations. Then that denotes someone's going to pay you something that is owed, generally in monetary terms. But sweat equity really denotes the fact that you own a chunk of the society. You're talking about now dividing up. Okay, well, you know, these people built the sewage system, so you got a stake in the sewage system. These people built the majority of the houses, particularly the mansions here in Europe. So they have a stake in that because they built it and didn't get paid. What is there that we didn't contribute to? Or what is there that we did contribute to that we've never been paid for? So therefore, we're not looking for a payment. We're looking for a stake in it. And I think if our language sort of, you know, evolves to having a stake rather than getting paid a one-off payment, it will help us to grow into the great rulers that we have the potential to be. No, Brother Hakeem?
100%, you know, and the stake that we deserve is bigger than what Peter Cushing used to give to Christopher Lee when he used to hunt down the vampire, man, because it's not just sweat equity. We also got blood equity. We've got to remember that we've sacrificed blood for this nation from when Britain fought against America, when America wanted to be independent and free. You know, black people fought on the side of the British in World War I, World War II. The human resources as well as the economic resources that was taken out of the Caribbean and Africa so this nation could fight the Nazi regime, you know, going all the way up to the Falklands War, going all the way up to even, you know, when Britain was fighting Ireland. We've always sacrificed our lives for this nation. As Katie said earlier, we've helped to build the economy of this nation from the 40s and 50s onwards. Even what Brother Lee just said there regarding the Industrial Revolution, there would be no Industrial Revolution of Britain if it wasn't for the human resources that were used that are in the Caribbean islands and the Caribbean nations. We've helped to build the whole culture of this society. We've got to remember that there wasn't even a youth culture here before we came here. We've got to remember that little white boys and little white girls used to dress like adults and not even have their own music, not even have their own expression until black people came here with our cultural expression. So everything from economy, everything to the sacrificing of defending this nation, everything to breathing life and soul into this nation, we've been doing for decades and centuries. And even if we went back to even so-called prehistory and prehistoric history, whether people want to check out the Grimaldi prehistoric people that populated Britain or the Cheddar Man that populated Britain, again, if it wasn't for that black gene, there would, you know, as this may make Nigel Farage vomit with his cognitive dissonance if he actually studied this and learned this, but you know, if it wasn't for that original black gene, there wouldn't be these white people on the streets of the UK today being able to protest saying black and brown get out, because we were the fathers and mothers that helped to even populate the British Isles originally. So have we got a stake here? yes, we've got a massive stake here, but also we've got to remember how we bring that forward and how we get that value, because sometimes we may have social amnesia, historical amnesia, political amnesia. And I would say out of all of the maybe non-white groups that have come here over the decades, the Caribbeans are in a very unique position because we find that we share the same mother tongue, we share the same names. As Nigel Farage said to Trevor Phillips when he was being interviewed on Sky News, when Trevor Phillips challenged him over his immigration views, and Nigel Farage said that, well, there's a generation of young people here that do not share British values, that do not share our British way of life. And Trevor Phillips said, well, who are you really talking about? Isn't that the Muslims? And he said, yes. And then Trevor Phillips tried to challenge him by saying that he's a son of immigration. But Nigel Farage turned around and said, kind of paraphrasing him now, but you know that old adage that white racists used to use back in the 70s and 80s. But you're like one of us. You're not like them.
Right.
So basically, Nigel Farage turned around to Trevor Phillips and said, oh, but come on, West Indians, you play cricket like us, you speak our language, you have our values. And because of what we've gone through as Caribbeans, it's not even just a level of integration, but there's been levels of assimilation.
Right.
And it's only when these type of race riots happen that remind us that there is still a large percent of this population that, even though we're born here and we've sacrificed here and we've built this nation, and we have a serious stake in this place, as you said, we forget that others to this day still not fully see us as British.
Right.
To this day.
Well, let's explore that point. Let's go down this road, because you end on a good note, on a great note, for me to just pivot to Brother Rashid Nix and Brother Twilight. So talk to me, Brother Twilight, Brother Rashid, in regards to having a stake and seeing ourselves as owners of where our ancestors have worked, bled, and cried. Isn't that really the missing link here? Is that we're always talking about going back somewhere, going somewhere, as opposed to looking around and saying, my life would be much better if I actually lived over there. If we as a people owned more farmland here in the United Kingdom, for instance, and started to feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, shelter ourselves, we could make the UK into a really solid home. Or should we just be of the mind, okay, we're just going to all pack up and go back to Africa and go back to the Caribbean? So having a stake here, do you believe it starts with us really trying to put forward more serious leaders? Because if you contrast what I'm saying, for instance, with our Asian community, the Indian community, Pakistani community, if Pakistanis put forward a candidate known as Sadiq Khan for mayor, and he wins the mayoral election, Sadiq has a wife of similar, ethnicity, right? You look at Richie. Richie was a Hindu and Indian. Richie became the prime minister, and his wife's of the same background. So it's much easier now for us to say, or can we say that when these individuals go into power, they actually see themselves as having a stake in this country because their language is ours, our country. I remember Richie Sunak, whenever he would speak, he would always refer to England as our country. And some of us interpret that as him trying to be white. How can it be him trying to be white and he's married to a woman of the same ethnicity as himself and same culture? But when most of us go forward and we're married to someone of a totally different culture, of the European culture, then when we say our country, then yeah, we know what you mean. So talk to me about us pushing forward really serious candidates who can represent us and really represent our stake in this country and in Europe. so that we can change the narrative going forward?
Okay, good question. I would say first up, my parents, my mother and my father, they both quit England over 40 years ago. You know, I remember my dad when he left back in the 80s, he went back to Barbados. He said to me, son, there's no future for black people in England. He said that 40 years ago, you know. And my mother, she lives in New York City, you know, and what she achieved for herself in the States was far more than what would have happened for her if she had stayed here, you know. But me, I just wanted to stay because I just wanted to run up and down the street and, you know, be a little wild child about the jurisdiction of my parents. But then years later, you know, you come to the conclusion that, okay, well, maybe, you know, maybe sometimes we should listen to what our parents say and they have good advice for us. So I don't know about staying here. I never considered myself, you know, to be, as they say, British, you know. If West Indies are playing England at cricket, I'm supporting the West Indies. That's it. I'm a West Indian.
I don't want you to misunderstand my point. I'm not trying to say that you're British or we are British. I'm saying that you have a stake.
Yeah.
The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And we know that the earth is 57,255,000 square miles. And it's supposed to be, all of it is supposed to belong to the original man and woman. Are we doing ourselves a disservice by saying at this time, at this very juncture? Because if you're going to leave, for instance, and you say, I don't see it as mine, do you actually have somewhere else already prepared to go? And are you willing to leave your stake, your parents, your ancestors' investment is what you're saying you're willing to forego to those who have a mental capacity, as Paula Binner was saying, of a 9-year-old?
Well, sir, with all due respect, the thing what I recognize through my time working in the political game, and this is what one of the elders in Brixton said to me. He said the amount of work that you put into the politics for the Green Party, he said, if you'd have put that work in for the people down here in Somerleyton, down here in Moreland, down here in Cole Harbour Lane, he said, imagine what the centre of Brixton would have been like for our community.
Right.
He said, brother, he said, the people then would have loved you because they know that you're working on our behalf. He said they would have backed you to the ends. And I think where our political leaders go wrong in terms of the idea of having a stake, a lot of our political leaders right now, they're not coming out of the struggle of the community. You know, they're parachuted in, so to speak, you know, and so therefore they're not really seen as being a true representative. Therefore, they're never really held to account. So they can take certain types of actions. And this is one of the things that came up when we did the film Why Don't Black People Vote? And, you know, and we raised the issue of, you know, where is the leadership and where's it coming from? Whereas if you look at, you know, you mentioned the Asian community, you know, you go down to Tower Hamlets, as much as they got their thing going on down there, they have a community. You know, they elect their own mayor. You know, their mayor was thrown out of the Labour Party, banned from office for 5 years for whatever reason, and he just waited his 5 years, and then come the legislation, boom, he got elected straight away. The people voted him back in. You know, and that's the community. We have areas where you have maybe large numbers of black people living, but we don't function as a community. And that's where I think we go wrong. If we're going to deal with our stake, as you put it, then our stake lies within our community. And that's where we start to build. And we don't build our community anymore. You know, maybe my dad's generation, your mom's generation, you know, they moved different. You know, I think we represent the last of the kind of community builders.
And also, you know, so thank you for that, brother Twilight. You know, because I hear this a lot, that we are not community people. We're not building our community. And is that born out of the fact that we don't see the place as ours? Because if you are a gypsy, if you're a rolling stone and you're not planning on being somewhere for a long time, you're gonna, take off and hitch your caravan in another city or town in the next month or so. You're not tied to that part of town. But if you say, this is where I'm going to live, this is where I'm going to raise my children, this is where I see my family growing and developing for the next 50 years, that new attitude, doesn't it give you a greater sense of belonging? And isn't that the problem? We're wandering too much and need to settle down. I'm going to come back to you, Rashid. So I want to hear what Brother Twilight has to say on this point.
If we look back and tap into our memory, Brother Minister, when our people practice that, even here in the UK as well as in the US, they were somewhat accused of being uppity Negroes, uppity Blacks. And as a result of that, you got hit with the Teddy Boys and the Rockers. But you got the Tulsa, Oklahomas and the Rosewoods in the United States.
Right.
They burned it out. They terrorized it out. Terrorized it out and burned it out so much so that our elders didn't necessarily feel there was a stake for us in these places.
Right.
And as a result, it was about go to school, learn to become a professional, get you a nice job, get your own place, keep your head down, don't make too much noise. When you look at the fabric of Britain as a country, what it means to be British was born out of acts of union, an act of union between England and Scotland, then Northern Ireland. Wales was annexed by the English. So even in the fabric of the laws, they don't quite represent us, and we don't quite see ourselves as a part, to the point people have to fight for the Equalities Act, the Race Relations Act. But now all of that's been dismantled and turned into the Equalities Act, and the element of it that protected us or gave us the type of protection that we needed severely weakened in favor of other groups. And so you got a generation now, after seeing Black faces in high places and putting a Black face on Eurocentric Western white supremacy. The greatest example is putting a Black face on US foreign policy and the likes of Barack Obama. Got to the point that more Americans Black Americans identified themselves as African American, whereas prior, people were describing themselves as Africans in America. And the same has happened in the UK. You got Black faces standing up in Parliament, and it gives this illusion of inclusion. And now you got Black British. And those terms have psychological profiles that go along with them that are byproducts of the language in which you speak. And the language in which you speak doesn't speak fondly of us or empowering to us, although we use it.
Right. So let me say this. If we cut through that which has failed us, for instance, if we say today we want to have our own schools and 100 of us come together and we buy a building and we have our own teachers in that school, that is our building, and we've started an educational process for our community. We can do the same with agriculture. We can do the same with healthcare. All of the main areas where we need servicing, we have enough people in these areas to go for self, for instance. So to the point I'm making, if me and you, Twilight, and all of us on this call today say we want to start our own school here in the United Kingdom, we've got to think at least 50 years or to educate a whole generation, which is 30 years. So just a 30-year educational plan would really give us a greater stake and give us something to fight for, would it not? Something to start a business to support. So I'm speaking more on level.
I hear you. I hear you. And that's why I think we as a people have to decide if we want to be in if you want what kind of fight we want to be in. Is it going to be bats, knives, or guns? Because either way it goes,
all of the above.
It's going to be a fight. And we have to, be ye separated. Them uppity Negroes think they good at this. Them uppity Negroes, you see what they doing over there. And then there will come the pressure. Now, if we're going to, because I've been involved in those educational processes, and as you know, in the work that I do, and it requires consistency, and it requires a constant booster shot of injecting people with the information to keep them on that path, because we're in an environment that is working against us at every angle. So it's about what kind of fight we want to be in. And it's whether or not we have continued to give birth to a generation that has the tenacity and the determination to fight that fight regardless of what comes.
Right. So let me, because time is on us. So thank you for that. I'm going to jump straight to brother Rashid Rose. You come and you represent Islamic communities, and you know Muslims, the way how Muslims maneuver. Wherever Muslims go, they set up a school and they set up a mosque and they anchor themselves and they see wherever they go as theirs, okay? You can find Muslims in very Caucasian countries, in Dagestan, in different parts of Russia, different parts of wherever. Like you find Muslims everywhere. But one thing Muslims are very good at, they're very good at establishing their own way of life in the middle of a country that think the total in a total different way. So do you think then, brother Rashid Rose, that when you look at, when somebody says, okay, we want to set up a mosque here and a school, they're looking at that mosque and that school being there forever. Okay, not for like just my life and my children. The idea is this is gonna be here forever. That means wherever we establish that mosque and that school, we are establishing or saying we have a stake here. Okay, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, that building, that school represents us having a stake. Whether we can speak the language or not, we speak the language of our common or our basic interest. What can we as Black people learn from Islamic culture in regards to claiming your stake, where you find yourself in this moment and time?
Very good question, brother. Very good question. I've often asked the same question too, because when you look at the Asians, maybe the Arabs to a lesser extent, and like you just said, wherever they go, they establish some things. And even the Black Muslims in this country find it difficult to do that. It's rather sporadic in terms of the way we organize ourselves. We don't, apart from the Nation of Islam, which may Allah help you, brothers, man, seriously organize. If we Black Muslims can take a leaf out of the Nation of Islam, but we'll be further ahead, because the integration between the Black Muslims and the Asians is almost zero. There's elements of racism in there as well, which prevents unity and harmony. So in answer to your question, it's quite difficult for Black Muslims to make progress because the unity factor is almost absent. And in the wider context of Black people, a lot of Black people perceive Black Muslims as sellouts. It's an Arab religion, it's a Pakistani religion, without understanding the history of Africa and the history of Islam in Africa for centuries, always been there. So it's quite difficult to really put a foothold in terms of doing something concrete collectively for Muslims in this country. We in the Sound Project have been trying very, very hard, but the support and the unity from the wider community is really very small. Like I said, compared to the Asian community, who have always positioned themselves in little groups from Bangladesh, from here. And look in Luton, for example, there's about 15 mosques in Luton from different parts of the sub-Asian continent. We black Muslims here, there is no black mosque in
Those
the
people
UK.
are saying
There's
we
no black
have
mosque here.
a stake. And that's the simple point I'm making. Like, once you establish certain institutions, you are saying and you sending the message to your children, we have a stake. That's why when it was being said that, you know, those concerned, the rioters were coming down to Birmingham and going to Manchester, when they saw the Muslims come out, they had to think twice, because these individuals, it was clear they were going to protect that which they saw as theirs, without a doubt. And it put the fear of God in concern. So, Brother Trevor Hakim, I'm going to come back to you, Twilight. But Brother Trevor Hakim, how are you seeing this?
Oh, so no, in fact, it's not even that point. I just wanted to put a reminder out there that to give time for us to go to some points that was raised in the chat, also our live audience.
Yeah, this is
so if I could just give that, if I can give that five-minute warning to our audience that within the next 5 minutes, get your questions ready. If you want to put a question to the panelists, all you've got to do is just raise your hand icon. We've got a technical team that will then come to you, and they will unmute your mic, and you can put a question live to our panelists and our contributors. But again, please, if you're going to make a statement, please make your statement quick, because as you know, time will be of the enemy. Or if you want to put a point or question in the chat room, you can do. Thank you.
Right. So going back to the stake, Brother Twilight, because I'm dealing with solutions now, because I think too many of us talk about going to the Caribbean and I want no stake in England, and you go nowhere. You go nowhere. Some die in the airport on the way of trying to go somewhere and leave it so late. They're in their 60s with crutches going back home, in a wheelchair going back home. And then many of our people go back home and develop Alzheimer's and have very poor medical arrangements, and then end up having to fly back to the UK, fly back to America for medical attention. So why don't we consider, Brother Twilight, based upon our suffering here, okay? We don't have to be limited to the UK or any country in Europe, but should we not have connections in Africa, the Caribbean, and also right here where our ancestors built these countries?
No doubt we should have a connection. I think a large part of what it is we're up against, Brother Minister, is the erosion of what it means to have a culture. My understanding of culture is that it is the systems and processes that a group uses to cultivate life. That means protected, that means created, that means educated, that means house it, that means the whole process of maintaining that life. And so that means it's not just about how I dance, it's not about what music I listen to. In fact, those are byproducts of the bigger picture. And I think when you talk about Hindus and Pakistanis and Indians, that's one thing they fought to maintain, even though they were subjected to British colonialism. They fought to keep their culture intact. And that culture is what is allowing them to survive at this stage. And also, I believe, from what I understand about certain aspects of their culture, is that certain elements of the caste system of race, caste, somewhat the same, is embedded in their culture, and that also materializes in how they deal with us. So when we look at ourselves and we decide if we're gonna fight with bats, knives, or guns, meaning whichever part of the world we choose to set up in and put things in place, we have to be ye separated from those who are not like us. Speak a language that unifies us, but not only unifies us, but culturalizes us in principles and systems and processes that maintains our way of life, that we can build and protect what we put in place. We are so busy now trying to unlearn things that we've learned from our oppressor. that barely, just basically just trying to hold on to life, we're unlearning a lot of stuff. But at the same time, we must build. And so me personally, I got things I'm using willpower. I got things written in my will that things got to happen a certain way for things to be done a certain way in relations to culture, because we have to move our people in a different direction, and we have to do it quite forcefully in some cases to get them on that path.
And
but
again,
at the end of the day, we don't have that power to utilize that force. We're at a disadvantage. And that's where we have to question how far are we willing to go in creating this alternative for ourselves, whether it be here, Africa, Caribbean, or the United States.
So just to your point, like, you are going to bequeath your intentions and your assets to your loved ones through British law. Okay, so the whole will system, all of that, you're depending on a system to ensure that your loved ones inherit that which you have worked for through British law. So my vibe is, rather than just depend on the law and different aspects to ensure the future when we won't be around, can we not ensure that our children and our grandchildren have a place to be educated according to what we desire before we leave? Because there are people who object to saying, well, we don't want no stake in England. But that's because you don't have no children. You don't have no grandchildren. You don't have no great-grandchildren. But when you start having children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, you realize that everybody don't want to go where you want to go. You might want to go to the Caribbean, you might want to go to Africa, but your children and your grandchildren and the mothers of these children might not want to go. So therefore, isn't it wise to have somewhere where those who you are interested in shaping their minds in the future, isn't it wise to have a facility in every country where we are found? Do we really just want to limit ourselves to the Caribbean and to Africa as a global people? So therefore, going back to the point, should we not take a chunk out of where we are through organizing ourselves, which will allow us, to really have something to fight for? Because I see so many people leave this country, dear brothers and sisters, and within a short space of time, they make their way right back. So they either left prematurely or they realize there's some unfinished business right here in the UK or in America or throughout Europe. We're going to go to questions now. We're going to go to the listening audience. Everybody all right? I hope so. So, Rabbi Trevor Hacking, how are we going to handle this part?
Yes, sir.
You're going to ask the question. We can.
No. Okay. Well, what I'm going to do, there's a few points that were raised in the chat, so I'm going to throw them out to the panel. I've also received a couple of questions via text, which I'll put forward to the panel as well. But again, if there's anyone in the audience, and the Zoom audience that is, that wish to engage live with the panelists or the contributors, all you've got to do is just raise your hand icon, and our technical team will get to you, recognize you, unmute your mic, and then you'll be able to put a question forward. So one of the first points / questions that was raised in the chat room is, there is a lot of screaming and shouting from racists about people of color not having British values. Can someone please explain exactly what these values are? And I suppose that probably means because they've seen the same people that have screamed and shouted, well, none of these people, none of these immigrants live with our values, and these are the same people that have raided Greggs and burned down shoes owned by stealing Crocs. They're wondering, well, how can you also be talking about British values, and what are these British values? Because that
they broke into Greggs. They broke into Greggs.
that does get expressed a lot regarding British values. So I think Rashid wants to deal with that first.
Brother Rashid.
Yeah, British values is an interesting one. They're actually, for those of you who don't know, write these down, because I always get my students to learn these. There are 5 fundamental British values. This is what the government says. This is what we teach. Number 1, democracy. Number 2, rule of law. Number 3, respect. Number 4, tolerance. And number 5, individual liberty.
Okay.
And how that played itself out in the last couple of weeks, then that's entirely up to you guys to work out, because I didn't see much respect, I didn't see much tolerance, I didn't see much rule of law taking place. But those are the 5 fundamental British values. That is what is the
I'm going
government.
to ask Brother David and Brother Paula Binner to also chime into this question on the floor. David?
I think going back to what Rashid has said, that is something which is taught in citizenship lessons in this country. I think there's another one which isn't written, which is do as we say, not as we do.
Thank you for that. Brother Paul?
There's an old chorus that we used to sing in church when I was a child. Wide as the ocean, high as the heavens above. And there's a difference between theory and practice.
Right.
A good reference though about British. Look, take Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah did a brilliant stand-up about the British values abroad, etc. So it's to me it's a joke.
Okay, thanks for that.
But the population, you must remember, a population of nearly, was it 60-something million?
Yeah.
How many of those were out rioting?
Right.
So
Exactly.
they're just like they're like the ones who will express that.
Okay. Brother Twilight?
Possibly the most honest. Most people ain't gonna do it.
Right. Brother Twilight?
Or, when you talk about British values, I think they're purely aspirational. It's not a byproduct of their behavior in the world or how their houses of parliament behave and the way in which they talk and conduct themselves in the language that they use within the houses of parliament. But I think if we were to teach British values, we would have to do it as a group by participating in the process of having homegrown political representation that is accountable to us and demonstrate that accountability so that others can see what it looks like to have democracy, because democracy is meant to be transactional. You're meant to get something for your vote, not just vote for the sake of voting. And when you're hog-tied to voting for a party and hog-tied to not to a manifesto that has no rule of law, that means that the politicians must tell the truth. That puts holes in their whole concepts of British values. And I think if we were to teach it, the greatest way that we could teach it as a group of African heritage people was to demonstrate it through activity, demonstrate it through what we do, show that we can grow our own politicians. They don't have to be tied to no party. And not only when they get in there, we can hold them to account. Right. And when we put them in there, they recognize that our vote requires investment. Right. So they're meant to give back. If we put you there, we put you there to give back. And everything that the government has belonged to us, so we have a right to access what's ours.
And I think, Brother Hakeem, before we go to the next question, I think the party of Nigel Farage is a good example of what you mentioned, because these guys did not exist. And as a result of just running on an independent ticket, now they're in the parliament, right? Running their crazy agenda. But the point is, they're not part of the mainstream major parties, Conservative, Liberal Democrats, or the Labour Party. Brother Hakeem?
So yeah, thank you, Janet, for that question, that point. This comes from Enrico. Enrico, if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of merge both of your points / questions together because it is quite lengthy. But Enrico raised 2 points. The first one, he's putting forward that, are we just wasting our time and effort here because we don't even have security to protect said stake? But then he also expressed, ultimately, despite the challenges we face regarding organized exodus, what is preferred? Resistance and struggle against discrimination in the UK, wasting our time, or traveling back to our ancestral homelands and establishing ourselves there? So The point and question that he's raising, I suppose, is that, well, look, if we do have a stake here, we are going to build here. How do we protect the very things that we are building here?
Right. So, Sister
And,
Katie,
and also, and also he's also asking, should we invest that amount of effort here, or should we just do that elsewhere?
So, Sister Katie, you've been helping a lot of our brothers and sisters in the Windrush generation to receive compensation and receive guidance. How would you tackle that question? What would be your advice?
Well, basically, first and foremost, people of the Windrush generations do have a stake here in this country, and I did want to respond to that earlier. But basically, people who arrived here during the Windrush era, they were British subjects of the UK and colonies. That was their immigration status. So they were already British citizens from being within their homelands. That's because at the time Britain owned those colonies. People who were born then were actually born property of the crown. That's what they called it, the proper definition. So the fact that they were born property of the crown, of the royal family of the UK, is clearly evidence that, yes, anybody that arrived during that time most definitely has a stake in this nation. Not only that, but the government makes money from each migrant that lives in this country. Therefore, then also on top of that money, if we work and if we rent or buy houses or whatever, money from every single thing that we buy, from tax, etc. So actually, people do actually have a stake here from being here, especially from the Windrush era, not only in that sense that I've just explained, but in the sense that they did rebuild this nation. And had they not, this nation would have been finished from a long time ago. The reason why people come here was to rebuild the country. So with that said, everybody does have a right to be here. And not only that, but, we need to, I know that some people do wish to leave the UK and return to the Caribbean and Africa and the other nations that they're from. However,
it's not hard, is it, Katie?
Well, not really. The fact of the matter is that Africa, if you do have your Caribbean passport, you can go to many nations in Africa without a visa and be able to do business rates, buy properties, buy land, etc. at the same rate as the nationals. So there is a lot of opportunity, but and I am someone who has bought land in Ghana, and I'm hoping to build on it, not just for myself, but build an education facility there for local children and potentially children from the UK as well. But anyway, I also understand why people would say, well, actually, I'm not leaving the UK, because they do have a stake here. Not only that, but there's multiple generations that have been born in this country, that have fought for this country, that have lived, worked and died in this country. Why should they leave? Because there was a bunch of unhappy people protesting. Do you know what I mean? So I also support that as well. I feel like because one of the questions that you asked earlier is kind of, are there any type of solutions, or how do we avoid serious consequences? I think that people that, I think that there is merely two main options, which are to either decide to leave the UK if that's what you wish, look into ways of doing that, or decide that you're going to stay here, and with that you will have to coexist with the others that are here. And I think that someone mentioned earlier that it's down to education, or the lack of education, the people who were ignorant and outside protesting. As we've seen from many of the interviews, people don't actually know what they're protesting for. A woman who was interviewed at a protest in Sheffield started speaking about she doesn't want anyone to abuse children. She doesn't care what race they are, and she was one of the protesters at the protest. Some other protesters were heard saying, well, there's people that have come here basically living off the governmental system, not working, and at the same time taking our jobs. And when he was asked to clarify what he meant, he said, that's what I mean. They're working and they're taking our jobs, but they're also bumming off the system. So that shows that he doesn't truly understand why he's there.
So this
because,
represents like a lunatic fringe of the society, right? So just to move on, because we've only got a few more minutes left. So Brother Lee, how do you see the question on the floor? You know, because you've served in public office here, you know it up and down and in the middle. You know, we obviously need to move forward. How would you tackle the question that Brother Hakeem read out from one of our listening audience?
I think that it is a global world today. It's almost as if it's a question that is posed for a previous century, insofar as people today, and young people in particular, are increasingly global in their outlook, in their travel, in their business investments. They are people who have got residencies in the UK, have got a little business somewhere with their family in the Caribbean or on the continent of Africa. And these are not mutually exclusive things. One can claim your stake here in the United Kingdom, and one can participate in a global economy, of which there's lots of opportunities where maybe some of the challenges that we face here, are not as apparent. But I would say this about the future of the country, because I don't think you can answer this question in terms of our sustainability as a people in the United Kingdom unless you look at the economics. Because my father left Jamaica, not because he didn't love Jamaica, not because he wasn't, a full-blooded Jamaican. There were no economic opportunities in Jamaica. And so he took the opportunity to move to another part of the world. And his grandfather before him moved to the Panama, was working on the Panama Canal. And they worked there so long, my Jamaican grandfather spoke fluent Spanish. And what I'm saying is the globalized nature of the world today means that it's not either or, it can be both. Now, in relation to how we secure it here, I think you've really got to look at fundamental democratic reform. I want my racists where I can see them in plain sight, not hiding behind a Tory flag, not hiding behind a Labour flag or a Lib Dem flag or a Green flag or whatever flag it is, right? Let us have proportional representation. That means that you and I can form a political party and get elected on a proportional representation of our vote, but so can the racists.
Right.
But my view is I'd prefer those racists in a clearly racist party,
right?
Like Reform, out there where we can all see them, we can challenge them, we can have a debate. Because I think that in a democracy, if you have a group of people who are culturally racist in their own country, don't they have a democratic right to organise? I guess they do. I think that we're being fooled into thinking that people in the Labour Party are not racist, or the Liberal Dems are not racist. These are our friends, and those people over there are our enemies. And I think what we need to do is fundamentally restructure our democracy. There should be votes for 16. Right? We don't need voter ID. I mean, why are there so many barriers for you to vote? I can buy a Porsche Taycan, choose the colour, the spec, the tyre spec, the interior spec, pay for it all on my smartphone, have it delivered right outside my door on my phone, but yet I can't vote on a phone.
Exactly.
I mean, we need
go for the Targa instead. But thanks for that. Thanks for that, brother. Real quick, because time is on us, brother. Paula Binner, brother Twilight, and back to yourself, brother.
In 1985, roughly, Patrick Harrington and Ian Anderson, other than British National Front, said they were stopping street level activity and were going to infiltrate every institution in the country.
That's what everyone the Ku Klux Klan said also. Brother Twilight, real quick.
I think it's also time that we really grew up in terms of understanding what white supremacy is, in terms of looking at it as an institution and how it operates. Globalists are people who participate in a white supremacist socioeconomic system that globalizes around the world. And in some way, you're going to end up dealing with them. So we shouldn't be so easily triggered or not triggered at all by somebody saying that somebody's a racist.
Right.
There's racism in all of these parties. You can't get away from it. That's what it is. Whoever you choose to vote for, it should be voted, it should be based on your convictions and your values. And if you're not going to grow your own homegrown politicians, then that's the one position that you have to take. But to not participate, is like not understanding what politics have to do with a bottle of orange juice. No, those oranges have to be pasteurized. They have to be, the plastic has to be approved. There even needs to be a zebra crossing put on the street somewhere for you to get to the shop. So politics is a part of everything that we do. So this whole thing of politics and all of this stuff about how we don't participate in it, we can't really get down in that kind of framework anymore. We have to recognize things for what they are. Don't cry over the races. We know they there. We know they there. They've been there. And we have to secure ourselves against their tragedies. Deaths in custody, secure ourselves against police killing us in the streets. And that may mean us living together in our own communities, regardless of what they say. Because I notice in England, they like to say these ghettoized Black communities. Oh, call it ghetto all you want. At least we looking after ourselves
You
and
go throughout
securing
the whole
ourselves.
country, you see Caucasians living together, but the minute a few of us get together, all of a sudden it's a ghetto.
Yeah, and it's okay for us to live amongst ourselves. And the more we understand ourselves, the more we can do for ourselves, the more we can build for ourselves. And if something's going on at a shop that you own, wouldn't it be great to call a neighbor that live right down the street from your shop while you're abroad to go down and have a look at what's going on in your shop? Because you know everybody in the neighborhood. I know what that feels like, man. We got to get that.
Thank you, brother. Brother Hakeem.
Right, thank you. I've received some text points and questions, so just real quick. And the people that have been texting me, if you don't mind, I have to really streamline your points and questions. So the first one, which I think this may actually be speaking into something that you mentioned in some of your opening statements, Brother Paul. So this point / question that's been texted to me is, do you think that the riots could be a distraction? Is there something bigger at play? And are there people that invest in civil unrest within the UK?
Is that for me?
So, well, I'm just thinking that maybe also speaking into your point that you raised earlier about the EDL and their registered name. But if anyone else wants to
the definition of that, though, he just gave.
Please feel free.
Yeah. So, and brother Lee, I want you to jump in on this too. Go ahead, brother Paul.
No, I think once you
got a massive echo behind you.
Sorry, David, can you mute your mic because I think it's feeding with Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, once you recognize the name, you'll see that there are bigger pictures that are going on and distractions. So that's all I want to say to people is always, it's all, I know Twilight calls it social literacy. I like to call it cultural literacy. But there are all these different forms, whether it be financial literacy, all these things. It's about working our minds that we take in critical. I'm not talking critical race theory. I'm not talking that. I'm talking critical thinking needs to be done across the board about politics, economics, etc. And what the other thing is, the only population in the country that's diminishing is the actual Afro-Caribbean. I always call it the Paul Reaney effect. When I was growing up, Leeds United had one mixed race player called Paul Reaney. Now you look at the football teams across the Premiership. Nearly all of them have got mixed race brothers in there, and they're coming from a lot of time from a certain source. So all I'm saying is that there's this dynamic. I like to look at things with clarity. I like to look at things with an honesty. Because the same thing's being said. I did see someone put a comment about the island divisions and regional divisions in Africa, with all the things, the flags that have been given to us by colonization, by enslavement, etc., etc. Those are triggers that keep dividing us, and we have to understand it's not just Machiavellian; it's Setian. If you go back further still, it's Setian. It's a process of the way we've been trained to think.
Thank you.
So yeah, the EDL thing, Look at
Okay.
the title of it and ask who else has got a defense league.
Right. Thank you, brother. Brother Twilight, real quick.
Yes, I was just going to say that I learned something from Dr. Frances Rose Crescent when I was about 19, 20 years old. And she told me, you know, she was asked the question, how does she study? How does she know about these different things? And she said that she reads across the platform of different things, different bits of media and different bits of newspapers, magazines, and she pays attention to what's going on in mainstream news and what's being printed in books. And so if you're reading this information, you can start to piece together that this thing is not just about these riots. These riots, come on now, a young black boy, 14-year-old black boy was stabbed to death just before they broke up for school by a white man. There was no riots in the streets.
Yeah, nothing.
There was not a single one.
And he was Spanish.
Oh, you're Spanish, yes. And then this happens, and it's not even a Muslim, but it's mosques that are being attacked. So you got to ask yourself, and then listening to what happens in Parliament, who all of a sudden was saying they're not going to approve certain things in terms of sending certain weapons to people. Then the riots is happening. Then all of a sudden now there's a different tone in Parliament about how they now going to look at what can be worked out to send weapons. And I'm like, well, what does all this got to do with one another? So if you start studying, you start looking into things, you start to piece things together and recognize there's bigger fish to fry. And there's a process of creating what they call manufacturing consent to shut down the net and shut down freedom of speech. And people got to recognize that they slow walking themselves into a fascist regime to control all of that, you know, mainly being led by what people consider to be mainstream parties. So you got to ask yourself, what are these things and why are these things happening? And why all of a sudden they want to make everybody friends, but at the same time, keeping everybody friends, but limiting our ability to look after ourselves and practice self-determination. Everybody's together. We're going to all fight against the racists and the fascists, but blacks, don't you try to get control of nothing for just yourself. It's got to be for everybody or nobody.
Right.
Or just us.
Thank you, brother Hakeem.
Just real quickly. Again, I'm just trying to streamline this. This another question that came in via text.
Yeah. This will be the last question. Then we're going to ask the panelists to summarize.
Why do you think it hasn't kicked off as bad in Scotland? Which I think is an interesting point. Do you think it's because English politicians and the DUP, that's an Irish political ruling group, do you think they've spoken more into anti-immigration than politicians in Scotland?
What do you think, Brother Rashid? Nix? You're muted.
Yeah, okay, I'm back. Unmute. Well, in Scotland, they have a slightly different political system in Scotland. So, you know, Scottish students go to university and they don't pay tuition fees. So lo and behold, Scottish people are, dare I say, more intelligent. They're more educated. But I'm not saying that you know, the conditions don't exist. But there seems to be something about English as opposed to Welsh, as opposed to Scottish, that produces, I don't know, some sort of different energy. But I would say a lot of it is down to education. I would say it's education.
Okay. Anybody else want to chip in? Well, let's go back, brother Hakeem. There, one last question.
That's we can go into, because of the time. I think we go into rounding up and moving forward with solutions.
Very good. So to each and every one of you as panelists, could you please just give me a 60-second summarize of our discussion today? Are we heading towards civil war here?
I'll go first if I may. No, I don't think we're heading for that level of conflict. But I do think that economic decline will mean inevitably it will be an incredibly challenging time. It's going to be a challenging time, even if there was no racism in Britain at all. the UK would find it incredibly difficult against the economic headwinds that are heading our way. So I think that what we've got to do as a community is come together in order to force a kind of democratic reform that will give you constitutionally based rights that are accessible and affordable in law. Because, I'm not interested in whether people like me or not like me. I want my grandchildren to be able to say, if I get discriminated against, and they are likely to, continue to be discriminated against the police, there is an affordable legal route for me to take to challenge that racism, to challenge that system. So I think democratic and constitutional reform are absolutely key for our sustained stay in the United Kingdom. But I also think internationalism is an important part of, certainly for me as a Pan-Africanist, I want to, and I look to the rise of the African continent for growing economic opportunities. And they want business with Black people in the United Kingdom. That's why they're offering us free passports in many African countries as a sign of reparation on their part. So I think it's a combination of consolidating our prisons here by getting rid of this 17th century democracy and replacing it with something fit for the 21st century. And I also think it's about our economic consolidation. And by that, I mean that rather than continually looking, just trying to make a buck in Peckham or Hackney, that we're actually looking at Harare. And we're actually looking at, places throughout the globe that need stuff that we've got that we can trade with. So I think
very good. Thank you, brother. Rashid Rose, closing statement.
Yes, I like to support what the brother just said. I think Black people in particular here needs to get more involved in politics. I think politics has become like a pariah. We need to be more strategic in our planning collectively. And I think politics is one where we can demonstrate our collectivity. And like Rashid Nix was into politics, I am into politics in High Wycombe, but we need to have some sort of political party or political infrastructure to give us some kind of direction of travel. I really feel that's something that needs to happen.
Maybe that would be one of our discussions going forward, Brother Trevor Hakeem. Maybe we need to have that discussion in regards to the way forward politically for us as a people. Sister Katie Downey.
Good idea.
Greetings. Yes, I just wanted to quickly touch on population that's been mentioned many of times. In response to your question, are we going towards a civil war? I doubt it.
Race war. Race war.
Sorry, into a race war. If we are, I don't think that it's in anybody's best interest, particularly the majority of this country. The reason being is population has been mentioned many of times this evening, and right now the white British population of the UK is dying. You can compare the consensus, the most recent consensus to one 10 years prior to that. You will see that the white British population is dying. Also, health experts and health research shows that white British people are dying faster than other races. The same research also suggests that Black and brown people in the UK and outside of the UK are populating more than whites across the globe. Therefore, in the next 2 or 3 decades, in the UK, research suggests that 1 in 4 people are going to be white British. That means that 3 out of 4 people are going to be mixed or Black or Asian. Therefore, it's not in anybody's best interest within the UK to be having a race war. Also, right now, what's happening is the African continent is getting stronger by pushing out European leaders, by pushing out leaders from the UK and from the USA as well. And it's making the access to resource for those nations much harder and much tighter. That means that the economies are actually starting to collapse. And I'll just finish on this. Places like Sweden and Japan, they are already asking for people from other nations and sometimes making specific requests for Black males to go there and populate the country. So right now,
don't you accept it, brothers?
Exactly. It's not really in the benefit of the white British people to be having a race war right now in terms of the kind of foreseeable future. Yeah.
That is crazy. Like, we're not trying to seed bank here. Like, that's just crazy. But anyway, thank you for that, Sister Katie. Brother Paula Binner, closing remarks.
I'm afraid I'm always going to be saying to people to just develop and evolve yourself, and then consciously work with groups. I like to look at the meanings of words as strategy. I heard my brother talking about strategy, which is the art of generalship or leading a military force. Well, there's another word called stratagem, and stratagem means any artifice or trick used designed to outwit or surprise an enemy. And knowing what your enemy is, who the enemy is, starts with the self. It's the enemy in self or bad practices, which I'm always looking to my brothers and sisters in the Nation of Islam about the good practice that you do have, how to eat, to live, etc. But I start with those things. We need to be more conscious of almost everything in this society. So as like Marcus Garvey said, when living in a world of wolves, you must also always apply race first in every part of the world. Right. He also said that until Africa is free, I'll consider the whole world to be my home. Right. So it's a case of wherever we are, we need to be present and becoming fully present and conscious to ourselves, to our community, to our families, etc. That's all I can say with that.
Well said. Well said. Brother Rashid, next.
Am I on?
You are.
Okay, right. What I would say is the UK heading for, is it for a race war? Is that
right?
Was
you should know you accepted our invitation.
I'm just repeating. I was talking to Brother Wayne earlier on, and we were discussing this, and I said to him, it's interesting because what's the comedian's name? Chris Rock, 25 years ago, he said there's a race war. He said it's black folk versus the N-word, you know? And when you look at where we are, sometimes I think maybe some of the stuff that's happening is a bit of a distraction, and our problems, our issues are much closer to home. And maybe, you know, we need to kind of deal with our communities first and foremost, and get our heads right. Because I think if we start trying to, you know, change systems, but yet still the behavior that's taking place within our community doesn't warrant it, then we're going to just end up being, you know, we're going to end up in the situation where we are currently, where, you know, people get despondent because things aren't moving the way they're moving. And I would say that, you know, if we study the history of this planet, people have always been finding reasons to go to war. This is, I can't look and say there's been a period where there's been peace and harmony and everyone's been happy together. Someone's always trying to dominate someone. Someone's always trying to, and it's been that way for as long as it is. I'd say it boils down to education. Educate your children as much as you can to not be ignorant. Educate them to understand, to be critical thinkers, you know, to question whatever it is they see around them. You know, don't take Andrew Tate for the gospel. Don't believe anything. You know, become super critical thinkers, and so they don't get gassed up. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people in our community, we're currently getting gassed up by some of this stuff and getting really, you know, hyper emotional. And it's not what we need right now. Right now, we need some clear heads, clear heads, and some clear strategies.
Right. We're down to our last. Thank you for that. Well said. We're down to our last 2 minutes. So, David, if you can give us your minute of conclusion.
Can you hear me?
Very clearly.
Excellent. I would just say I don't think we are heading for a race war. I currently live in the east of Manchester in a town called Oldham, and we saw riots, perhaps quite larger in number of people who were involved than we have currently. And that was in 2001. And then the reviews and independent inquiries were done, and we came up with this concept of community cohesion, which you might remember was being used around about 20 years ago. So I don't think we are headed for that. I think we've seen these sorts of things before. And I think in terms of moving forward, I think it's about what Rashid has just said, is making people aware that a lot of what we're led to believe is nonsense. And for those who say to you that Britain is a Christian country, then they need to answer the question. In Newton Heath, which is the only part of Manchester where there was a skirmish or riot, the local priest in my faith, Catholicism, is Nigerian. So why in a Christian country do we need to go and recruit, not just in social care, not just in the NHS, not just in teaching, but you need to recruit in their own priests, vicars, etc. So why would they need to do that if it's such a Christian country? So, and furthermore, those churches wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Black communities, particularly from Nigeria, in the case of Catholicism and Ghana, and from the Caribbean more so with the Church of England. Those churches would be dead and gone and sold off for flats.
Thank you for that. And lastly, Brother Twilight.
Well, one thing I guess what I would say is racism is a system, and it's institutionalized throughout the Western world. And whenever something happened, these little incidents, they're not happening in isolation. They're part of a bigger machine. If we got an issue, then the issue is with our governments. And those governments are meant to be controlled by us. And in the scriptures in the Injil, it said that God gave the world to us to go into it and subdue it and make it produce for our well-being. So we must subdue the politics by growing our own homegrown politicians and holding them to account, and remembering that democracy is transactional. If we're going to vote, we vote to get what we need. And what we need is not informed by intense emotions of feeling one way or another in regards to things that upset us, but more so about the bread and butter and the bottom line of keeping us afloat, keeping us living, keeping our children well, keeping our children educated, keeping them in the best place to have the bandwidth to be critical thinkers. So we have to take responsibility for our own self-determination. And there's no one that's going to come and be able to save us but us. And next time you want to point a finger at somebody, remember you got 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. So you need to check yourself first. And you got the thumb pointing up at the sky, reminding you that you're accountable to someone greater than man on this earth. Remember that.
Thank you very much. Brother Trevor Hakeem. Final thoughts?
Oh, no, sir, you know what? I'll leave my minute to you. So we can close out, because again, I'm just aware of time. So you could take my final minute, sir, in your closing as well.
Well, I'd like to just do that, and thank you very much for your charity. I'd like to just use this final minute to thank all of these wonderful panelists. Let's take our devices off mute and give them a big, massive round of applause for such an insightful, rich.
Thank you.
Discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very well done.
Great. The Christian time is back.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. Always an
Fantastic.
educational experience.
Fantastic. So we look forward to seeing you in the next couple of weeks or so for part 2.
Thank you for the presentation. This is so fantastic.
You are
I love
welcome. You are welcome. So we
So
look
much.
forward to sending you information in regards to when we'll be back in front of you. But all what's left for me to do is to thank you for your kindness. Thank you for carving out time on a busy Saturday evening to engage in major issues that affect us all. And I honestly believe if we build on these type of platforms, we'll be able to bring about solutions and make, you know, this country in which we're living in, or wherever you are around the world, you'll be able to contribute something positively and organize and systematize your people and the people, because, hey, we live in a massive world, and blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called the children of God. So let us be the peacemakers, and let's educate the warmongers and let them know that the day of trying to exalt skin color over somebody else's, those days are dead, long gone. You got to bring something more than skin color today. So we thank each and every one of you, and we hope that every one of you will use the wisdom that was shared this evening to raise the level of conversation, raise the level of debate, raise consciousness so that we can exist on a much higher plane than the beasts of the field. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We look forward to being in your company in the very near future. Good night and peace be unto each and every one of you. Thank you.
Good night.
To you.
Alayhi salam.